We ask, what is something creepy that has happened to you that you still occasionally think about this day? In 1996, I was living in a northern Canadian town working on the oil rig as a low-level laborer. I was 20. I just started out in couch surfing when a friend offered me a windowless basement room in his mom's house in an unfinished basement. His mom was on disability and he and his brother sort of ran the house. I set up down there with the second-hand mattress and a little TV and fan. I had always considered myself a, quote, tough guy. Partied a lot, fights, stupid macho bullshit like that. So, I wasn't a squeamish young man. Well, after a little while living in that room, I started hearing things. Not external groaning or banging or the house shifting or anything like that. What I was hearing was a soft, malevolent chuckling in my ear, like someone whispering laughter, over and over again. I thought I was going crazy. There was a bookshelf in there, and I had a bunch of favorite books I packed around, and they kept falling off the shelf. I'd go up to use the bathroom upstairs and come down. No one's been down there, yet my books were on the floor. It got so bad, the laughing sound in my ear this one night. I was a bit of a tough guy, as I said. I went upstairs and asked my friend if I could sleep on the floor in his room. I remember being surprised because he did not make fun of me. This was a town where a good time was going to a strip club and then beating the shit out of someone outside in the snow. The next day he said, quote, Brent couldn't sleep down there either. He moved out pretty quick. Brent was his cousin, a guy I knew casually, so I went to find him. He was also on Gyno Row at the strip club on his days off. He looked at me dead in the eyes and said, yeah man, that room is fucking haunted. I only went back in that room to move my shit out. Ended up sharing a place in a trailer park with another buddy. I moved into a shared house and my housemate told me the house had burned down and been rebuilt, and the ghost of the old man who died in the fire visited them. I never had any experience of the old man, but when I was half asleep, I'd very clearly feel a cat or two jump onto my bed, settle down and purr. It happened often. It was quite chilled out and I did not mind. I would hear the distinctive thump of the cat jumping off the bed from time to time. But there was never a physical cat there. Once in that house, but a different bedroom, I had a terrifying lucid dream in which a possum/cat-like hand or claw was coming up from inside of my bed, clawing my thigh. It hurt so much I thought I might be gouging myself in my sleep, but awoke up unharmed. Months later I moved out and met the landlord, who lived a few doors down, to return the keys. I said something like, quote, must have been scary when the house burned down and killed the owner. Were they living here at the time? He said, oh no, the owner was fine and he got out, but he had about a dozen cats and several of them did die in the fire. I'm pretty sure I was sharing my bed with ghost cats. Not sure what the story was with the dream, but I've had a couple of lucid dreams in my time, and they've always been incredibly scary. When I was about 13, myself and a friend were walking to a middle school dance. I lived right across from the school. From my house there was about a 50-meter sidewalk to it from the main road. Anyways, as we were standing at the traffic light waiting for our turn, I noticed a man in a van and a person in another car yelling at each other. I'm 100% sure I saw the man in the van wave a gun at the person. So, he pulls up to the lights and is waiting. He calls to me and my friend and says he needs directions. Who the fuck asks a 13-year-old for directions this late? I pull my friend's arm and tell him we need to leave. We start walking back towards my house away from the guy, and he gets out. He leaves the van right there at the light. My friend and I take off full tilt, make it halfway down the path before ducking into some side bushes. We're sitting there, our hands pressed over our mouths while trying to be as still and small as possible. I'm trembling, and I can hear my heart pounding in my ear. The man stands at the end of the walkway staring down towards my house. Luckily, there's quite a few houses along that block, so it would have been impossible to tell which one we ducked into. Clear as day, in his hand, a gun. He finally leaves and my friend and I run back to my house, Tell my mom, and she calls the cops. I refused to walk to school after that. I was an internal work event party at a fancy hotel in a different state. It was 80s themed. I started talking to some dude, and I barely knew anyone there, so I was trying to network. And he tells me he does not work for my company. Okay, no worries. I make a joke about the free food, and he stares me straight in my eyes and picks up on one of my french fries off my plate, dips it in ketchup, and eats it without saying a word. Kind of freaked out, and I drop the food in the trash and just walk out of the room and decide not to think about it. A few minutes later, there he is, staring at me. I changed rooms again. I'm short, so I hid behind people and pretended to talk to people I kind of recognized from my home office. He follows me. Every minute, I see him. I finally got the courage to approach a woman I knew, and from some of the meetings before, seeing her around the office. When I asked if the party had any kind of security, she immediately asked if I was about the dude in the blue jacket and white hat. Apparently, she noticed him staring at me creepily, so I did not have to try to convince anyone. Security took him away and everyone moved on, but I was scared and paranoid for the rest of the business trip. When I was about 10, I was walking around the neighborhood with a few girls that were a couple years older than me, who I did not know very well. They were the neighborhood cool girls in my mind, and I was tagging along. After a while, we noticed the car slow down behind us, and the driver was staring hard. We moved a little faster, and he kept the pace, so we took off running. It was a huge neighborhood, and he was persistent. At one point, he even threw the car in park and started to get out. Thankfully, we were faster. We dipped through the shortcuts and ran through the yard, but he knew the neighborhood well. To my adrenaline-fueled child's mind, we ran for eternity. We finally got to one of the girls' house, but she lived with her grandmother, who had one strict friend allowed in the house policy, apparently regardless of an attempted kidnapping. So, 2 girls went inside, and 2 other girls and myself had to go to the other side of the neighborhood. We had gotten a couple streets over when we saw him again, and took off running. He was alerted and still persistent. Just as I was coming to terms with never seeing my family again, one of the other girls waved down a minivan, and it was her mom. She drove me home, and I got grounded for taking a ride with a stranger. My mom still doesn't believe me to this day. I was walking to school one day like usual, and this van passed me just as I got to the end of my driveway, and it was about to step onto the road to cross it. I remember 2 guys in front were both staring at me. A white van with a blue stripe that ran horizontally around the middle of it, but they turned the corner and sped off down the road. I was a little unnerved, but crossed the street and went down the same road they sped down. I saw them further down the street, turning the corner up ahead, and was a crosswalk. A few minutes later, the van was behind me, and slowing down to match my pace. They'd circled the entire block just to get behind me. I didn't even think, just reacted on pure instinct and ran for my mate's house a few doors down, praying he hasn't left for school yet. I can still remember running down the driveway and just body slamming the back of their car, absolute feared. Luckily, they hadn't started reversing yet. They drove me to school and the cops got called, as did my mother. And the cops left thinking I was just overly hysterical and that they were not after me. However, not even a week later, a friend of mine was nearly grabbed from her letterbox 2 streets away by a van matching the exact same description. For some reason, to this day, no one believes I was possibly about to be kidnapped despite believing my friend's story. Neither of us had adults who saw the van. Both of us ran for a trusted adult, yet when she reported it to the cops, they put out an alert. Occasionally, I'll see a van with the exact marking, same blue strip, and have to remind myself, it was 30 years ago this happened. Used to dispatch or call take 911 in a moderately sized city. Was working overnight once and we started getting a ton of calls about UFOs over the area. It was a weeknight in summer and lots of people were out walking or drinking or whatever we sing this thing. We probably took 100 or so calls about them. For reference, I might have handled 300 or 400 calls myself on a shift, and as did the supervisor that rotation. I took over trying to resolve it so everybody else could focus on the typical stuff. We had a hot phone to the airport ATC for air emergencies. I got used to that once for plane crashes. That was terrifying. And they had absolutely no idea about what was going on and actively resisted getting involved. A little while later, got a hold of an FAA hotline, and they definitely had a UFO policy, but were only interested in taking info. They did not disseminate anything. Talking to them felt like an interrogation. I left my badge number instead of my name. Eventually, got a hold of a duty officer in an Air Force base relatively close by. He told me they were aware of the situation and they were monitoring it, and it was considered a closed issue. Whole thing was a trip. Definitely got vibes like I was an extra in the opening of Independence Day. This was before the days of neighborhood Facebook groups or Yik Yak. The local radio stations had ton of pictures up on their websites for a while. I came home once from school when I was about 15 or 16 on a dark Friday night. It was winter at that time, so it started to get dark quite early. I was home alone when I arrived. My parents always got home late from work, and my brother had football practice every Friday after school. First thing I do when I get home is change into my PJs in my bedroom, which is located on the upper floor of the house. My bedroom sits directly above the kitchen. I eventually hear the kitchen door close suddenly. Not violently or anything, just normally. In this case, it's the door that leads to the exterior back part of the house, and initially did not think anything of it. I knew it was this specific door in question as it makes quite a distinctive noise. I remember thinking it was either my brother who had possibly arrived early or my grandma who has a tendency to walk into our house, then call for either me and my brother sometimes. Eventually, I started to get weirded out when I couldn't hear anyone, no moving or saying anything. So, I stepped out of my bedroom and called for both my brother and my grandma on the top of the stairs. Nobody answered back and I still could not hear anything. Weird. I started to slowly walk downstairs, then stop halfway through, and I'm now facing the steps that lead to the living room. The kitchen is to the left. Suddenly, I hear sounds like heavy breathing, like someone had just run a marathon and was extremely tired. It seemed to be coming from my left, so that meant the kitchen. I was honestly completely unsure if it was my brain making these noises up in my head, as I was already feeling a little creeped out before I started walking down those stairs. I stood frozen for probably a minute or two, just trying to decipher this supposed breathing I could hear. Eventually, it stops. Being now completely creeped out, I head back upstairs, genuinely concerned someone was in the house. I grab a random object in my room to use as self-defense, just in case I end up coming across an intruder. I somehow gain the courage to go downstairs. Don't ask me how I'm such of a chicken when it comes to creepy situations like this. I check out the living room, toilet, nothing out of the ordinary. I step into the kitchen, nothing either. Nothing that could indicate someone had possibly been there. The only weird thing was the kitchen door I mentioned was unlocked. My parents and brother and I usually close both the door and the front door when we leave the home, but clearly, someone had forgotten to lock it. The thing is, since it had been left open, I couldn't rule out the possibility that someone might have actually not been in the house, even for just a few minutes. It's still something that creeps me out to this day, as I have no explanation for what I've heard. When my grandparents passed away, my family moved into their house to take care of my uncle, who was slightly special needs and had lived there his whole life. I got a lot of creepy vibes in that house, and had a lot of nightmares while living there. One evening, I had the worst nightmare ever that was super realistic. Towards the end of the dream, I saw the scariest demon smiling at me with the blackest of black eyes, or lack of, more like emptiness. Hundreds of razor-sharp teeth curled into a smile, and strange quack white skin almost like a bone. The demon somehow conveyed to me that he was going to murder me just by smiling. This nightmare made me not want to sleep for weeks out of fear of seeing this thing again. I did not tell my family about this dream. I did not get along with this uncle who lived with us. I rarely spoke to him unless completely necessary. The next day after the nightmare, he asked me a question. He said, "Hey, do you still have that app on your phone?" The app he was referring to was some stupid phone app for reading EMF. I downloaded the app just for shits and giggles a few weeks prior because I said the house was creepy and I tried to see if I could pick up any messages from ghosts or demons in the home. I told him, "Yeah, I still have it. Why?" And he said, "Oh, I was wondering because last night I saw something standing at my doorway," and then proceeded to describe the exact demon from my nightmare. I was so freaked out I did not even think properly responding to him. I told my family about this, and they agreed that something was in the house. None of us slept for the rest of our time here. Luckily, we didn't live in that house very long before selling it. I still think about the demon from my dreams sometimes, and hope I never encounter that smile again. Also, there's no way my uncle could have known what I dreamt, because like I said, I did not tell my family about the dream. I fully believe that he saw the demon in person that I saw in my nightmare. When my friend and I were 17, we used to work in a Pizza Hut together. We were closing up one weekend, so it was about 11 p.m. by that time. We shut down and we were ready to lock up. When we walked out of here, we heard the car. There was an old lady sitting in their front passenger seat. My friend opened the driver door and asked the old lady before getting in, "Can I help you?" The old lady said, "I just need a ride home." So we tell her that we just have to go back inside and call our moms to tell her we'll be late. We go back inside the store, lock the doors, and call the police. Within 10 minutes, the police are there arresting her. Turns out, it was actually a 47-year-old man dressed up as a lady. They found drugs and a knife on his body. In my teens and early 20s, my best friend and I used to have a lot of sleepovers. His mom worked the night shift as a nurse, and his little brother usually stayed in his room and went to bed early. So we had the house for ourselves. We'd cook, eat dinner together, watch TV, and talk a lot. We also had a tradition that we called night walks. Always around 11 p.m. or midnight, we'd leave the house and just go for a walk. 2 to 3 hours. It was especially nice in the summer because the air was warm, but there was a coolish breeze and the fields and pastures smelled amazing. There was one particular route we walked often. Towards the end of it, there was a big forest that we had to cross, and when we emerged from it, we were on a hill that overlooked the whole city. There was a bench, and sometimes we'd sit down and enjoy the silence, the distant lights, and to relax a bit before going downhill and home again. One time, we did exactly this. Walking through the forest was always a bit scary in the middle of the night, so once we got out, my friend suggested on resting on the bench for a few minutes. We left the trail, walked 20 meters across a meadow, and finally got said bench. The bench was located in a place where it was surrounded by trees and bushes, except in the front where you had a great view. We sat there for maybe 25 minutes and had a smoke, and just talked about random stuff like space and philosophy. At one point, my friend remarked that he was getting cold because this was late fall, October or November, so we decided to get going and walk home again. When we were almost back to the trail, my friend asked me if I had brought the lighter. I told him I thought he picked it up. We turned around and went back to the bench. For a while, we just kind of touched around in the wood surface but could not find it. Since this spot was mostly surrounded by trees, it was very dark. My friend took out his phone and turned on the flashlight to find the lighter. He waved the flashlight around, and that's when we saw him. There was a guy sitting right behind the bench, like maybe 6 feet. He was completely dressed in black and just sat there, motionless on the cold, wet ground, just staring at us. We hadn't heard any noise, which means he must have sat there for the entire time while we were sitting on the bench, just staring at the back of our heads. That alone is super creepy to think about till this day. Of course, my friend and I both really startled, and my friend said something like, "Holy shit, man, you almost gave us a heart attack. What the hell are you doing there?" But the guy did not respond or anything. For a while, he just stared, confused, and he stared back at us. Then I asked, "Why are you sitting there on the ground?" No response. My friend asked, Are you alright? Still, nothing. It was a really surreal situation, but something about it did not feel good. I can't say what, but something about that guy gave me a really bad feeling in my stomach. My friend later told me he had felt the same way. Suddenly, the guy got up and began to walk towards us. I said, what's happening? And now the guy answered, but all he said was, yeah. As we walked around the bench coming towards us, I felt my friend's hand grab my coat and pulled me backwards. He quietly said, let's get the fuck out of here, man. We walked a few steps backwards, but we did not want to turn our back on the guy. Then we turned around, ran back to the trail another 100 meters. When we turned around, we were relieved to see the guy had not come after us, but we still walked home as quickly as possible. To this day, I don't know why the hell that guy was sitting there, who he was, why he was silently staring at us for almost an hour, what he planned to do when we got up and walked towards us. All I can say is my gut feelings tell me it was the right decision to run away rather than waiting to find out. 2 important notes to make before the creepy instance. Number 1, we locked our 3 cats out of our bedroom at night because they got loud and annoying when they want attention, to the point that they would wake up our baby. We always had to do a head count before bed to make sure that they were all out of the bedroom, to save us from getting back out to kick them out. And number 2, once in a while, one of the cats would slip into our bedroom closet in the daytime when we were open the door to grab a shirt or something, and they'll get locked in until we hear them scratching or crying, banging against the inside of the closet door. Scary event. One night, when my spouse and I were in bed and about to fall asleep, we hear something banging against the closet door. I asked him if he did a head count before coming to bed, and he confirmed that he did and could have sworn all 3 cats were in the living room. We're both immediately kind of creeped out at this point. My spouse gets out of bed and opens the closet door. Nothing is there. He leaves the bedroom to check out the rest of the apartment, and all the cats were curled up together on the living room couch. He returns and checks the closet again, just in case we mysteriously got a rat or something, but there was nothing there. After he came back to bed, we cuddled up and were about to fall asleep again, only to be jolted up by a louder, longer banging against the door and closet door. At that point, we were both ready to shit ourselves. We both got up and thoroughly searched the closet together. Nothing. I get the baby back to sleep. The banging was so loud it woke her. We get back to bed, practically intertwined because we're creeped out, but we're also so exhausted that we start to fall asleep again. But of course, what happens once again when we're asleep? Against the door. It's a little lighter this time, but now the doorknob is rattling too. Neither my spouse or I move, and I whisper to him, "Should we just stay in bed and hope for the best?" Out of pure exhaustion, he says yes. Despite being scared, I'm still beyond tired, and in my sleepy haze, I look towards her closet and sternly whisper, "This needs to stop now. We are tired and we want to sleep." After that, we fell asleep and there were no more disturbances. There haven't been any major activities since that either. Some occasional odd sounds and concerning shadows out of the corners of our eyes, but nothing major like that night. You just heard 12 spooky and creepy stories from Midnight Monster. If you enjoyed this type of content, make sure to subscribe so you never miss any unexplained mysteries or downright haunting stories. Until next time.